next-gen firewall technology known as AIOps. And my colleague Martin, who's on the call, who I'll ask to introduce himself shortly, will be taking us through that today. My name is Brett Ayres. I'm VP of Products for Teneo, and I'll be hosting this afternoon's webinar. So if you have any questions as we go through, it's a small group today, so please feel free to interrupt and shout out, or just put a question in the chat, and I will ask Martin a question on your behalf as we go through the session. So Martin, would you start to give a quick introduction before we start the slides?
Not a problem, Brett. My name is Marcin Mondrala. I'm based in the UK. I've been with Teneo for 2 years now. I specialize in Palo Alto networks, and so hopefully I can be your point of contact for anything technical and Palo Alto related. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Could you move us on to the next slide, please?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just run through the agenda very briefly for this afternoon. Probably got around about sort of 30 minutes or so of content and a bit of time for questions at the end. But as I already mentioned, please feel free to ask them as we go through the session this afternoon. So we'll have a little look at actually what Palo Alto's AIOps is. And I think it's worthwhile spending a bit of time there, as the name is a little bit misleading in some respects. There are elements of AI in it, but it does other things as well. So we'll cover off that. Martin is then going to take us through a bit of an overview of the UI, so you can get a bit of a look and feel for what the tool looks like. We'll then touch briefly on the architecture, so how it all kind of hangs together, and just look at that for a few moments. And then we'll go through some of the kind of key functionalities of the software in terms of what it can actually do. So like a lot of these modern tools, it has a huge range of features. Obviously, we don't have time to cover them all in a 30-minute session. However, if there are things that are of particular interest, because we're a small group today, please shout out. We can spend a little bit longer talking about those. And of course, always happy to have individual follow-ups afterwards. I'll wrap up the session at the end, talk a little bit about how Teneo can help in this space. And then as I said, any Q&A at the end, please feel free to join in. So Martin, if you want to move us on to the next slide, please. So kind of how have we ended up with AIOps, and why have Palo Alto invested all this kind of time and money in creating it? And what we have seen, having been a Palo Alto partner for the last 11 years now, is that as a technology, the firewall has become really that kind of de facto edge security standard. We know what they are, we know what the next gen bit does now, and for the most part, they are very successful at protecting us against a large amount of the threats that are out there. And as a result of that, we kind of trust them as appliances, and we trust them to protect us. And we're busy people, certainly if we're involved in network and security operations. And often these technologies can become relatively sort of set and forget in some respects as well. And that's where the danger kind of creeps in. So because we trust the firewall, we know it does its job, we find that actually the vast majority of breaches are actually down to firewall misconfigurations, or more accurately, where the configuration has not been updated. And I'm sure Martin will give some examples of some customers that he's seen that with. Obviously, we're not going to name and shame anybody on the call today, of course, but we've had customers where the rules haven't been updated for a considerable length of time, and despite the fact the file might have been patched and updated, it is potentially an area of weakness in an overall defense posture. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, please, Martin. So I'll hand across to you at this point, and you can take us through some of the details around AIOps.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ben. That was a good intro. So what is AIOps? You can look at AIOps from a couple of different perspectives. As the admin, day-to-day person that uses the system, but also from a kind of management perspective. So as an admin, what you need to know about this, it's basically using telemetry data. So whenever you log into the web UI, you've probably seen the pop-up saying, would you like to opt in into telemetry? So this is basically what enables AIOps. And so the crucial bit is the firewall itself, and it can be hardware, virtual, or panorama actually. And once you're done with telemetry, that data will be then sent to a cloud module for analysis. That's where all the magic happens. That's where the machine learning and AI analyzes the data. checks against best practices as well. And then finally, what we have is the kind of the presentation, the dashboard itself, which gives you the graphical representation of the data. It's quite useful because you can see, all your hardware issues in one place, all your security problems, issues in one place as well. And it gives you quite a lot of reporting capabilities. And if you work with the Palo Alto Firewall, you know that you can create your custom reports, and you can basically put anything that the firewall logs into those reports, but they're not the best quality as far as just looks goes, and it's kind of hard to build them when you start out. AIOps gives you the ability to do those reports out of box. And I'm not sure if you guys have ever done best practice assessments. This is something that we here at Teneo champion. I like to do best practice assessments for my customers because what it does is it allows me to make sure that the firewall is configured correctly. And apparently, according to Gartner, 99% of firewall breaches will be due to misconfiguration. Best practice assessment, a very comprehensive report that will allow us to find all the things that we need to change. But also, what you get with that is confidence that you are using the product to its fullest potential. And I have seen customers that had the uptime of a firewall for longer than 2 years, which to me suggests that there was nothing done with the firewall. And so like Brett said, purchase, install, and forget. Now, the downside of the best practice assessment is that as good as it is, it's a static file, and you have to give me tech support file. I've run it for the system, and we have a session, which means that if you change things, you make changes to the posture, the rule base, whatnot, you will have to run it again. It's very problematic. AIOps, to me, as a pre-sales engineer, is best practice assessment on steroids. Customers, once this system is deployed, can make changes. You can still use the best practice assessment. It's a really good base of what you have to fix. But then you use AIOps to see the changes and what they introduce to the posture, overall posture. So it's a really, really nice combo. And with AIOps, you can also create alerts. So whenever something happens, a critical alert happens, and can be hardware or software related, you can get an email alert on that. And finally, the really good thing about AIOps is that you can actually predict things that will happen in the future. And so because we're looking at telemetry data, we have a lot of statistics. We have, memory statistics, disk statistics, throughput statistics, and so on. So you can easily predict that, well, with the amount of growth that your business has, the unit in place might actually fall over in 6 months or so, or that there is an issue with disk, maybe logging is taking up a lot of disk space, and you can proactively, solve those problems before they become critical and potentially take the firewall down. I'm not sure, Brett, should we jump into the web UI and have a sneak peek into the functionality before we go on with the presentation?
Yeah, I think so. Let's give them an overview of the tool.
Okay, let me try. There you go. So this is the part where you log in. This is once the product or the solution is enabled. You log into the hub, apps.paloaltonetworks.com, and you go to your AIOps instance. And when you log in, this is what you guys will get. So our deployment, this is our lab deployment, so it's quite small. So we have 3 firewalls. One is actually at my place, my personal firewall. The 2 other firewalls belong to our gentleman that does professional services, and he has HA enabled, which is actually quite good. So from here, there are a lot of hyperlinks here. So there's a lot of information that you guys can get access to. So firstly, your host name, things like your model number, your serial number, PAN OS, when was the last time that the unit sent telemetry package to the system itself? And then, your device health issues, hours are running well, no problems there. Health alerts, and then security. And those are hyperlinks as well. So you can click on those. So for example, here, security alert. If I click on that, it takes me straight into the problem. And I can easily find out that this is the issue and this is the 460, that is my place. And service is not set in the rule with app ID. It's quite easy to fix. So on my firewall, because I have it back home, I don't necessarily want to have my traffic seen in the logs. So for now, it's just hanging off the wire, not really doing much. So that's why you get those random alerts. What you can see here as well is the adoption mode and best practice mode. And again, if you're familiar with the best practice assessment, you will know what this is. The adoption mode tells you if your functionality that you have, basically the subscriptions that you have purchased, are enabled on the allowed rules in the rule base. The best practice mode checks the same thing, but against what Palo Alto deems to be best practice. And those will be different. So see, the adoption is quite high here. It could be better, but if we click to the best practice mode, it's actually quite low. So what you can do here is you can actually click on what is failing, and we can drill into all the different functionalities and see what we need to fix. So for example, here with credential theft prevention, takes us all the way to the actual rules. And you can easily figure out which rules need to be fixed for the best practice adoption of threat prevention to go up. And I find that's very, very useful. From here, you can also generate alerts. And so here, you can actually generate your custom alerts. Again, it all depends on what the firewall is sending to the AIOps system. And there's a lot. And it's quite easy to build. You give it your name. It can be very general, or you can be very specific. So here we can create a rule which basically tells you any critical alert, send me an email, and you will get a lot of emails because it's very general. But you can add more categories and subcategories to make it much more defined. Posture is also very interesting, best practices. If you need to figure out what needs to be updated, just think about this. And this goes down to not installing the product and forgetting about it. This is a security device and a premium security device, so it has a lot of features. So we have to have a continuous loop of implementing the device, checking the posture, updating the deployment where needed, because projects come and go, vulnerabilities come and go, and so on. So we have to be in this continuous loop of making sure that the device is running at the best performance it can. The last thing I wanted to show is this. So in the monitor tab, again, you can see the health view and the security view. And you can drill into those. So if you can imagine, that you have a big deployment, more firewalls of different models, you will easily figure out which firewalls are struggling. And then you can drill down. Again, these two are HA, and this is David Flanders, our professional services gentleman. Let me just have a look at health, because I know he had some very interesting ones here. So if we drill down to the exact firewall, we can actually click on the serial number. That takes us to more hardware statistics. And we can even see the HA connections between the two units. So if any of those would be down, that would be flagged, and we would be notified about that. When we scroll down, again, because of the wealth of data that we get with telemetry, we have all the statistics for all the different interfaces and other kind of firewall modules. And what we can do here is we can actually correlate different ones together to have a better picture. So let me see if I can find an interesting one. I'm trying to find a interface with data. Let's see if I can find it. If not, I'll just pick one random. I'll just pick one random then. So let's say this one. So what do you see here? I know this is only for argument's sake because it's not being used, this interface. So what you can see here is logical interface, TCP connections per second. So what you can do now is, well, you have the related metrics. So you can also click on, let's say, packet rate. And now you can see a correlation between the two graphs. So depending on what the issue is in your environment, you can potentially correlate, traffic throughput on an interface hitting the limit to performance issues. I think that will be it for the interface, unless Brett, you have any other ideas what I could show?
No, I think if we go back to the presentation, we can have a look at some of the specific features in a bit more detail.
Yeah. And obviously, guys, if you after the webinar, if you want to look into any other specific features, we can definitely have a separate session on that. Going back to the presentation, again, just to summarize, with AIOps, what you can do is, you can make sure that you maximize your security investment. I know I'm reading this, but this is very important. The customer that I've mentioned at the beginning that had the uptime of 2 years, when I run the best practice assessment for them, came out that, well, the subscriptions that they have purchased pretty much not in use. I think the adoption was about 15% or so. So to me, immediately the question is, well, why bother, right? Why would you pay for a premium device, premium features, and not use them? Not to mention, it puts your business at risk. So with AIOps, you can make sure that you are actually using what you pay for. Proactively resolve firewall disruptions. As I mentioned, all the alerts can be created, custom alerts, and you can in advance make sure that the unit will not fall over and fix issues that are present. AIOps is easy to deploy. There is no extra hardware or software that you need to install. It's just a matter of a license if you want to have the premium version on the firewalls and just go for a wizard on the hub portal. And this is definitely something we can help you guys with. I have deployed this for multiple customers with success. Everyone is happy so far. And then obviously saving time. If you can solve issues today, you will avoid problems in the future. So that is very important. Now, what you can see on the screen now is the difference between the functionality of the premium version and the free version. The free version is not an EVA license. It's a full-blown license which you can deploy. Obviously, it will be limited to what it can do. Most of the features I showed you on the web UI come with the free version. And that's actually a little bit more because, for example, if you have Wildfire subscription, you will be able to get a report of Wildfire submissions or DNS security submissions. Where it gets interesting is the premium version of Palo Alto AIOps, because that gives you analytics and you can do threat analysis on all the artifacts that you get. You can also use the upgrade planner, which we'll cover in a second, and all the various features that you can see on the screen. I'll ask, are there any questions at the moment? Or are we good to continue?
Looks like we're good to continue. Oh, sorry, Keith, go on.
Yeah. My only question is how the telemetry gets sent to the cloud, and that was one of your first slides.
Yep. So The telemetry, once you log into the firewall to enable telemetry, it's under device management, setup telemetry. You basically enable it, just 2 clicks, and then you pick a region. Once you pick a region, given that the policy allows telemetry to be sent out, the firewall just knows where to send the data to, but it sends it to the Palo Alto servers, basically. And there are multiple reasons you can pick. Europe, America, and so on. You can be very granular with that.
All right, I found it. I've never configured that before.
Yeah, I must admit, not a lot of customers do that, but because it's one of those things, if you have to opt in, there's a tendency to not do that. It's actually very useful. It was useful in the past, but it's much, much more useful these days with AIOps now. Now, just enabling telemetry will not give you access to AIOps. You still have to enable the AIOps tenant. Okay. So moving on, I'll go through a couple of examples. I think I have about 5 examples in total. The 3 that we can see on the screen are proactive examples of what you can do in advance with AIOps. So zone protection profiles, secure yourself against floods, DDoS. Certificate management, that's a very interesting one. And then redundant power supply failure. So flood protection is one of those features that the box is, it basically comes out of box with every Palo Alto appliance. The problem with it is that customers don't necessarily enable it or don't want to, because first of all, they're not aware of it. And they're also not aware of the fact that you should really be looking at all the zones. What I see very often is customers, if they enable this, they will enable it on the internet-facing interface. But in fact, it's actually quite easy to DDoS yourself from within. So you should really be looking at enabling zone protection profiles, all the zones that you use for traffic in production, basically. The other problem that users or customers have is, what thresholds should I choose for the zone protections? And this is actually an issue that we had in the past as well, because it's not clear cut. You have different appliances, you have different requirements, you have different throughputs. And so it takes time and effort to figure out the best thresholds to set up. And it's a balancing act between, blocking legitimate business traffic and allowing too much traffic and potentially being flooded. And obviously, the business will grow. Internet bandwidth is getting cheaper. So just that will mean that there will be more traffic going through the device. So you have to do a constant review of the telemetry thresholds. And that's where AIOps comes into play as well. And this is a screenshot of the web UI of the actual thresholds and basically flood protection profiles. So at the bottom, what we have is basically AIOps finding out all the zones that are in use. We can also figure out which zones do not have flood protection profiles enabled and the impact. So you can know exactly what will happen if the thresholds are not set up correctly or if the zone protection profile is not configured. And then going on, you get a recommendation. So again, because telemetry, amongst others, gives the system an idea of how many sessions, how much traffic is going through the device, it can tell you exactly what the thresholds should be and what you should configure. It also gives you links to the SKs and admin guides on how to configure this. And then, because this is done periodically, once you configure this, in a month's time or so, if you want to review, you can change the thresholds as needed. Any questions on zone protection profiles? If not, I'll just continue on with the certificate management. Okay,
my question is, if there's a free version of this, why hasn't Palo made me aware of it at all?
So there is a ton of tools that Palo Alto has for free. The problem with Palo Alto, from my perspective as a pre-sales person, is actually there is too much, almost. Because there's this, and this is actually quite new. This is probably less than a year. And there was GA release and so on. So now it's actually working pretty well. There's also best practices assessment. There's also an SLR report. There's a prevention posture assessment and multiple other tools. So, question is, are you on the emailing list, for example, for Palo Alto News? Because I know there was a big campaign to get customers on webinars regarding relating to AIOps. So was that the case? Have you got any invites to I don't know, Ignite, for example?
Yeah, 600 emails a day I'll use as my excuse. There
you go. And that is a common theme, how many emails will you read that come from Palo Alto about, PAN-OS 11, Nova, about new features of this and that, about new models? There's a ton, right? So I think, and what works for me is having quarterly business reviews with our customers, where we actually talk about what we think is interesting and what customers can implement themselves. So if we haven't done that with you, maybe we have to change that. And maybe it's time to have a chat with the account manager and book a technical customer review session. Just an idea. Is that good? Is that a good explanation?
Yeah, it's good.
Cool. So let's move on to the second example. So certificate management, and this is not certificate management for your entire production environment. This is relating to the Palo Alto, obviously. And this is a very interesting one because there's a variety of different certificates that you can configure on the Palo Alto. You self-signed certificates, you can use a CA signed certificate, you have your device certificates, which are, for example, used to enable AIOps. And then you have the volume. So the volume is pretty much, what are you using the certificates for? Global Protect, your captive portal, and many other different features on the firewall, your IPsec, VPNs, and so on. And if you do not have Panorama, but you have multiple firewalls, just multiply that by the amount of firewalls. Now, what happens if you are the firewall admin, the sole person that manages the firewalls? You go on holidays, and the next day the certificate expires. Right? Worst case scenario, you're going to be fired once you fix things. Best case scenario, you're probably going to have to do a remote session to fix things. Okay. So with AIOps, what you get is kind of like a certificate expiry monitor tool. So as you see at the very bottom, the certificate that I've chose will expire in 7 days. So you can make sure that this is renewed, and it actually tells you which feature will be impacted if the certificate expires, and the impact itself. So you cannot avoid, basically, this is the proactive management of issues that haven't happened yet. Any questions here? If not, I'll just continue. Okay. The third example is redundant power supplies. So these days, most, if not all, of the Palo Alto firewalls come with a redundant power supply. Even the 400 series, the smallest one, can have a redundant power supply. So what happens very often is, if the main power supply fails, and you have a redundant one, this will go unnoticed unless you go into the system logs and then proactively look for that specific issue. Right? So with AIOps, you can set up an alert. You can get an email saying, oh, the power supply is faulty, and you can log an RMA. Now, the power supply issue is a very interesting one because you cannot use your users as a monitoring tool. So normally what happens when the performance goes down, you will have tickets open. Your customers will say, oh, remote access VPN is not working, or I cannot access websites, or it's very slow. And you'll know something is wrong, right? It's not the best way to do this, but let's be honest, that's what happens, right? If the primary power supply goes down and you have a redundant one, no one will call you because there will be no difference in performance. But there's an issue because if then the secondary power supply goes down, you will have an outage. So again, AIOps can let you know that that has happened, and you can order your spare supply. And these are all the other different scenarios that AIOps can also cover. Obviously, because it's a cloud service, this will just grow, okay? I think to me at least, the most important ones or interesting ones are HA related issues, certificate expiry, and anything hardware related. Any questions? I'll just give you guys a little moment to read through. Okay, let's continue. The other thing that you can do with AIOps, so one is proactive monitoring of hardware and software issues. But the other part of it is the ability to make informed decisions about upgrading your PAN-OS. And this relates to vulnerabilities, definitely. So you've touched on, the 100,000 emails that you get with marketing about Palo Alto. So I can bet you some of those emails are vulnerability advisories about critical vulnerabilities on the PAN-OS. So you probably read them, or maybe they go into the spam folder. If you read them, how much time does it take you to figure out that you are on the version that is impacted by this vulnerability? Do you need to upgrade your PAN-OS if there is a vulnerability on your version? So AIOps will help you deal with that problem. So most common triggers to upgrade are, like I said, vulnerabilities in software. But the problem here is, are you confident you actually need to upgrade your software? So for example, if you get an advisory that there's a vulnerability in PAN-OS, let's say 10.0 relating to Global Protect, but you do not use Global Protect, well, you don't have to upgrade. Easy as that. However, if you're using Global Protect, you definitely need to upgrade. The other trigger is definitely end of life, because if it's end of life, end of support, you won't be able to open a trouble ticket before you upgrade to the next version that is supported. Bugs, that's definitely a trigger to upgrade. And then new features, that normally relates to the latest releases of the PAN-OS. There's a specific feature that you are interested in, or in general, if you like to see what that new feature is, you would upgrade. And then the challenges, like I said, do you need to upgrade? And if you do need to upgrade, which version do you go to? Do you go to the latest and greatest? If so, which one is it? And then can you expect something, from that version? And by that, I mean, are you sure that you won't have other issues? Because maybe your version has a vulnerability, or the one that is available that fixes that, maybe it has another vulnerability. But then again, it might not relate to the functionality that you have. So you have this loop of, guesswork. So what AIOps gives you is the feature-based vulnerability detection, which means AIOps will have a look at the functionality that is in use, enabled on your devices, and this is per device. It will then check with the advisories to figure out if there are vulnerabilities relating to that version of Palo Alto that you have, but also the functionality. And it will tell you, well, there is a vulnerability, but it's not related to your functionality, so you will not be impacted. And keep in mind, every upgrade equals a reboot. So if you do not have HA and you cannot do a zero downtime upgrade, you have to schedule a maintenance window. If it's a critical issue and you have to do it as soon as possible, that's an outage. So with this, you can be confident in knowing how critical the actual vulnerability is. And this is just a screenshot of the upgrade planner. So the upgrade planner is that feature of AIOps that will tell you, these are the recommended versions of Palo Alto that we think that you should be going to. And then it can be, listed as per feature, for example, which means so go back. It will basically have a look at that feature versus vulnerability. So when you pick one of or the other on this from the slide, you'll be confident that there is no vulnerability built in that will cause you other issues when you upgrade, and it will cover all the vulnerabilities that you're suffering from at the moment. Okay. That was a mouthful, but I hope that was clear. And lastly, before we finish, and I think this is one of the biggest things about AIOps is the reporting. If you go with the premium version, you get access to reports relating to traffic, users, application usage, DNS and wildfire submissions, but also analysis of what was sent to AIOps. This is very powerful, and you can print it out as really nice reports from within the dashboard itself. And this is really good for management as well, because every now and again, your manager will ask you, well, where are we with the adoption of features? What is the frontline landscape looking like? What trends can we see? And then, you can also do deep dive troubleshooting once you know that something is up. And lastly, I would like to leave you with this quote from my personal network security guru. Every plan is fine, but if you are proactive in fixing issues, that's much, much better, right? Because every plan fails when the reality kicks in. Brett, to you.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. So just before I kind of just wrap up, any sort of final questions? No? Okay, thank you. So just very sort of briefly, kind of why sort of work with us. Obviously, other than that, we like to keep customers up to date, and as Martin already mentioned earlier, we like to meet with our customers once every 3 months to do a bit of a review on there. That is, of course, a free of charge service that we offer. But in addition, there's a few other things as well. I won't read everything that's on this slide, but I think the sort of takeaway here is that we're kind of big enough to cope, but yet still small enough to care. And we've been playing on the global stage for a long time. We've delivered a number of projects for Palo Alto over the years. I mentioned at the start of the call, we've been a partner for 11 plus years. So this is an area that's very much a part of what we do and who we are on there. So Martin, if you'd like to move on to the next slide.
And just to your point about us caring, I have, and this is just one last thing for me, I have deployed AIOps for a customer that has a single PA440, and I'm happy to do that. And that's the caring that we show to our customers. No one is too small or too big for us to work with.
Yeah, and indeed, and just to wrap up as well. So this is a thank you for anyone who's actually ever bought anything from Teneo. So a big part of who we are and what we're about is opening minds to new possibilities, and that really kind of comes in two different flavors for us. So first is with our customers, so bringing information about things like AIOps and other new technologies to the market. That's been our business for a very long time now. But also we like to open the minds of people who may be a little bit less fortunate. So one of the things that we believe very passionately about is providing education for children in the third world and the developing world. And the way that we do that is through working with a number of sort of national and local charities to build schools. And this is actually one of the projects that we're currently working on. I think this picture was from about a month or so ago. You can see here building a school, and the sort of initial walls are going up there, and they're just sort of starting to the project is starting to take shape. And we have made a pledge that we will donate 1% of our turnover to these projects for going forward on there until we have provided education for 1 million children out there. So something that's very passionate for us, and that's only really made possible by the support that our customers showing us in terms of choosing us for their various different projects and to work with them on different technology initiatives. So thank you very much for them. And then by way of finish, if anyone one more chance to ask any questions. Okay, so I think all that remains me to do is, Keith, Benjamin, thank you both very much for your time this afternoon. I trust that it was a useful session. Please feel free to reach out to either myself or Martin if there is any follow-up or any additional questions that come up that you think of after the session. But again, thank you, and thank you, Martin, for taking us through those slides.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
guys.
you.